The subway station was nearly empty, just the occasional flickering of overhead lights breaking the stillness. The last train had already passed, and the silence was almost deafening. I pulled my coat tighter around me, the chill seeping through my bones. Though the air down here was always stale and warm, something about abandoned subway stations always unsettled me. The way the tunnels stretched into endless darkness. The way sounds echoed just a little too long. I checked my phone. No signal. Typical. The city above was still alive with neon lights and honking cars. But down here, it felt like a forgotten world, a place trapped in time. I was waiting for a delayed late-night train, the only one left running this hour. I had missed the last direct line home, so I had no choice but to wait. The station was old, its tiles cracked, its walls stained with decades of grime. A few torn posters clung desperately to the walls, their messages long faded. As I shifted on the cold metal bench, I heard it. Footsteps, soft, deliberate, echoing through the empty station. I froze, straining my ears. They were distant but unmistakable, a slow, rhythmic tap against the tiled floor. I turned my head, scanning the platform. Nothing. Just the dim glow of the exit signs and the dark tunnel stretching ahead. Maybe it was my imagination. Maybe someone was in the next corridor, their steps carrying over through the vast emptiness. But as I listened, the footsteps didn't fade. They grew closer. I stood up, my pulse quickening. Hello? My voice barely carried past the hum of the fluorescent lights. No response. The footsteps stopped. A heavy silence followed, pressing against my ears. I took a step forward, peering down the platform. Still nothing. A distant drip of water echoed from somewhere unseen. My breath felt too loud, the air thick with something I couldn't quite name. I checked my phone again. Still no signal. The screen reflected my pale face, eyes wide, lips slightly parted. The silence stretched long enough for me to start questioning if I had even heard anything at all. Then, just as I started to sit back down, they resumed, but this time they were behind me. I spun around so fast that my heart slammed against my ribs. The bench behind me was empty. The platform stretched out, silent and still, but the footsteps had been right there, just a few feet behind me. I swallowed hard, my breath coming in short, uneven bursts. Maybe I was tired. Maybe the eerie silence was playing tricks on me. But I knew what I heard. I took a hesitant step forward, scanning the platform. There was no one. Just the dim, flickering lights overhead, and the endless stretch of empty tracks below. The subway station wasn't large. There weren't many places someone could hide. The thought sent a cold shiver down my spine. Is someone there? My voice came out quieter than I intended, almost as if I was afraid of getting a response. No answer. The air felt heavier now, thick with an almost suffocating stillness. I turned in a slow circle, my ears straining for any sound. Nothing. But something was wrong. I could feel it, the kind of feeling you get when you know you're being watched. I glanced toward the dark tunnel at the end of the platform. The blackness seemed deeper than before, almost unnatural, as if it was swallowing the light around it. The rational part of me told me to stay put, to wait for the train like any sane person would. But something else, something deeper, curiosity, maybe even fear, compelled me to move closer. I stepped toward the tunnel entrance, my shoes echoing against the tiles. Every instinct screamed at me to stop, to turn around, to leave. But I kept going. Then, Just as I reached the yellow safety line at the platform's edge, the footsteps returned. Not behind me this time. They came from the tunnel. Slow, deliberate, like someone, or something, was taking its time, stepping carefully through the darkness. The sound was unmistakable, a rhythmic tap against the concrete. Closer. I couldn't move. My feet felt rooted to the spot. My breath caught somewhere in my throat. My mind raced, trying to come up with a logical explanation. A homeless person living in the tunnels. A worker finishing a late-night shift. But the footsteps, they didn't sound normal. They didn't belong to someone just walking. They were too precise, too deliberate, as if each step was meant to be heard. The shadows in the tunnel shifted. I blinked, my pulse hammering. Had I imagined it? The darkness was so thick, so absolute. It was impossible to tell if something was truly there. Then I saw them. Two faint, pale shapes emerging from the blackness. Feet, bare feet, my stomach twisted. The figure was still obscured in the tunnel's darkness, but it was moving. Not running, not stumbling, just walking. Slowly, steadily. I took an involuntary step back. The air grew colder. The lights above me flickered again, this time more violently, buzzing like angry insects. My instinct screamed at me to run, but I remained frozen, my body betraying me. The figure stepped closer, just at the edge of the tunnel's mouth, still barely visible. Then, without warning, the footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was crushing. I held my breath. Then I heard it, whispering, low, distorted, like voices layered on top of one another, all speaking at once but saying nothing I could understand. It wasn't coming from the figure. It was coming from everywhere. The walls, the ceiling, the air itself. The shadows near the tunnel shifted again, and suddenly the figure was gone. Just vanished. The footsteps, the whispers. Everything ceased in an instant. It was as if nothing had been there at all. The only sound now was the distant rumbling of an approaching train. The distant rumble of the approaching train should have been reassuring, a sign of normalcy in the midst of the growing nightmare. But it wasn't. Something about it felt wrong, like the sound was coming from somewhere it shouldn't be. I stood there, my body stiff, my mind caught in the impossible reality I had just witnessed. There had been someone or something in that tunnel, and now it was gone. I turned my gaze toward the tracks. The train was still nowhere in sight, but the rumbling grew louder. The tunnel remained pitch black, an abyss that seemed to stretch beyond time itself. The air carried a strange weight, as if the space around me was bending, shifting in ways I couldn't see, but could feel deep in my bones. Then something moved. Not in the tunnel this time. Behind me. A sharp chill crawled up my spine as I turned my head ever so slowly. The platform remained empty, just as before, but the feeling of being watched had intensified. My pulse pounded against my temples. I wasn't alone. A quiet sound broke the silence, like fabric rustling, the whisper of movement in an empty space. I swallowed hard, scanning every corner of the station. The shadows seemed deeper than before, stretching unnaturally, clinging to the tiled walls like living things. Then the lights flickered again. But this time, when they came back on, someone was standing at the far end of the platform, a tall, thin figure, motionless, just standing there. The moment my eyes locked onto it, my breath hitched in my throat. It wasn't facing me. It stood perfectly still, its back turned as if it had just stepped out of the tunnel and stopped mid-stride. The way it stood was unnatural, too rigid, too still. A sickening dread settled in my stomach. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. Then it moved, not turning, not stepping forward, just shifting slightly, like a glitch in reality. 1 second, it was still. The next, it was closer. I blinked. It was closer again. A cold sweat broke out along my forehead. I hadn't seen it move, but it was closing the distance between us, inch by inch, every time I looked away, even for a fraction of a second. I forced myself to take a step back, my legs trembling beneath me. My instinct screamed at me to run, to get out of there, before whatever this thing was reached me. But my body was locked in place, frozen by a fear I had never felt before. Then the figure finally turned its head, not like a normal person would. Its neck twisted too far, too fast, its head snapping around to face me in a single unnatural motion. The face. There was no face, just darkness, a hollow void where features should have been. My vision blurred as my chest tightened, every cell in my body screaming in terror. The rumbling of the train grew deafening now, vibrating through the floor, shaking the very air around me. But there was no train, just that thing, now only a few feet away. Then, without warning, the station plunged into total darkness. Everything vanished. The lights, the platform, the sounds, gone. I couldn't see, I couldn't hear. I wasn't even sure if I was still standing on solid ground. And in that absolute silence, I heard it. A voice, low, hollow, right beside my ear. "You shouldn't be here." The darkness swallowed me whole. The darkness was suffocating, thick like smoke, pressing against me from all sides. My body refused to move, paralyzed in fear. My breathing was the only sound I could hear, shallow and uneven, each breath swallowed by the emptiness around me. The voice that had whispered in my ear still echoed in my mind, chilling and hollow. "You shouldn't be here." I tried to force myself to speak, to ask who or what it was, but my lips wouldn't move. The silence stretched, unnatural and absolute. Even my own heartbeat felt muted, as if the air itself was draining the life out of me. Then a sound. Not a whisper this time. Not footsteps, breathing, deep, ragged, uneven breaths. Not mine. It was right in front of me. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it. Something was there, standing inches away, hidden within the void. My instinct screamed at me to run, to move. But my body remained frozen. My mind raced, searching for an escape, but there was none. Only the endless, suffocating blackness. Then I felt it, a cold, skeletal hand brushing against my arm. A violent shudder ran through my body as every nerve screamed in terror. The touch was unnatural, ice cold, dry and lingering just long enough to send my mind into complete panic. The breathing grew louder, more erratic. It was closer now. I could feel the weight of its presence pressing against me. Then, a sudden flash of light. Blinding, white hot. The subway station reappeared around me in an instant, as if I had been yanked back into reality. My knees buckled, and I stumbled forward, gasping for air. The lights above flickered violently, buzzing like a swarm of angry insects, but the horror wasn't over. The figure was still there. Only now, it wasn't standing at a distance. It was right in front of me. Its faceless head tilted slightly, as if studying me. And then, without warning, it lunged. A shriek tore from my throat as I threw myself backward, barely dodging its grasp. The moment my feet hit the platform, The entire station seemed to warp. The walls stretched unnaturally, the air crackling with static, the lights pulsating in a sickening rhythm. Then the voices returned, not whispers anymore. Screams, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, layered on top of each other, wailing in agony, echoing from the very walls of the station. The figure loomed over me, its presence radiating pure, unfiltered malice. My mind shuddered under the weight of the sound, my vision blurring with panic. I turned and ran. My legs felt like lead, but I forced myself forward, sprinting down the platform toward the exit. The world around me distorted, twisting like a nightmare coming undone. My steps barely felt real, as if the floor beneath me was dissolving into nothingness. Behind me, the thing followed. I didn't need to turn around to know. I could feel it. Its presence clawed at the back of my mind, its hunger palpable. The screams grew louder, merging with the relentless sound of my own pounding heartbeat. Then, just ahead, I saw it, the stairs, the exit. I pushed myself harder, my lungs burning, my body screaming for relief. The tunnel walls seemed to close in around me, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. The moment I reached the first step, an unseen force slammed into me from behind. I flew forward, crashing onto the cold metal stairs. Pain shot through my ribs as I struggled to lift myself up. But before I could move, something wrapped around my ankle. A hand, cold, dead, dragging me back. I kicked frantically, my foot connecting with something solid. A horrible, distorted screech tore through the air, and the grip loosened. I scrambled up the stairs, each step feeling like a mile. Just as I reached the top, the station behind me erupted in a violent, deafening roar. The last thing I saw before I crossed the exit was the figure standing at the base of the stairs, still, watching, and then, just as suddenly as it had begun, everything went silent. I burst through the exit doors, collapsing onto the cold pavement outside. The night air hit me like a wave, sharp and biting, but I didn't care. I was out. I was alive. My chest heaved as I gasped for breath, my hands trembling uncontrollably. The city was still there, unchanged, as if the horrors beneath its streets had never existed. Cars passed by in the distance, the headlights slicing through the darkness, oblivious to what had just happened. But I wasn't safe. I could feel it. The presence, the weight of unseen eyes still watching me. Slowly, I turned back toward the subway entrance. The doors stood ajar, the dim underground glow spilling out onto the sidewalk. For a brief moment, everything was silent. Then a shadow moved. Not a person. Something else. It slithered just beyond the threshold, shifting unnaturally, clinging to the walls like a living stain. The dim light flickered and I saw it again. The figure, standing motionless, just inside the entrance. It hadn't followed me out. It couldn't. A wave of nausea rolled through me as I realized the truth. It was bound to the station. Whatever it was, whatever nightmare existed down there, it couldn't leave. But that didn't mean I was free. The faceless head tilted slightly, as if acknowledging me. Then it took a single step back and vanished. The station lights stabilized. The doors creaked shut. The world outside remained unchanged, the city still buzzing with life, unaware of the darkness lurking just beneath its feet. I staggered away from the entrance, my entire body weak, my mind reeling. Had anyone else ever seen it? Had others encountered that thing and simply disappeared? Swallowed by the station's curse? I didn't wait to find out. I turned and walked. No, ran without looking back. I didn't take the subway again. Not that night. Not ever. But the worst part, sometimes when I pass by an empty station late at night, I hear it, a whisper, a breath, and footsteps in the dark.